It's the 20th of December, 2021. I hope that you're doing good. My head shrunk overnight. Yeah, that's like the Bullfighter song. Exactly what we need for tonight's show. I managed to get 80 or 76 headlines in the description. So some of those headlines I had to cut out words in order to get it down to an acceptable number. Get your Fukushima poison food. Half the price of other poison food. So all of those prefectures, 14 of them, which is half of Japan, the food was banned. Not just Fukushima prefecture right there, but half the country. And they just lifted restrictions in the United States, for instance, without the United States media reporting it. Japan media was out gloating. And the same thing for United Kingdom, for Europe, and soon apparently Iceland and Denmark. I can't remember. I'd done a video on it. You can go back and you can see why that's a bad idea. Super Typhoon was actually over 70 people confirmed dead. The official story, how do I put this, in a 24-hour cycle, was the winds were 121 miles per hour, with gust up to 170 miles per hour. And all the media was running with that story, but it actually came ashore at 160 miles per hour and gust up to 160 miles per hour. You don't have infrastructure that can handle a 100 mile per hour direct hit. And so 160 miles per hour was the actual numbers. So I was hunting through all the stories. Third category 5 typhoon. A typhoon is like a tornado now, except they're 700 miles wide. This one was 160 miles per hour when it came ashore, and it stayed that way. And then it dropped the speeds down to 150 mile per hour after 30 minutes, sustained winds, which meant gusts are well over 200 miles per hour. And the 200 mile per hour number, well, even 150 certainly, but say 200, it turns large objects into projectiles. 100 miles per hour turns a lot of objects into projectiles. And when the 200 mile per hour barrier is broken, these large objects are shredding buildings and turning the buildings now into projectiles, because they're tens of thousands of pieces for each building turned into projectiles. And so animals and birds and everything in these neighborhoods, and humans, of course, are pincushions. And that's being a polite way of telling that story. And the Philippines, you can see, is not too far from Japan. And Japan now has caused these supercelled storms. These are supercelled. They're energized from the hurricanes going over a hotter than normal planetary oceans created by Fukushima. And that might be a little bit complicated for people to wrap their minds around. So they've released so much radioactive material that the atmosphere and the oceans are saturated with radiation. And what that means is, think of an invisible snowstorm where each snowflake is pulsing energy in every direction at 186,000 miles per second, sustained 24 hours a day for millions of years. And so nuclear industry has set us on this course where there's no way back unless we acknowledge the issues and start trying to come up with solutions. Currently, we're not acknowledging how radiation plays an effect in climate. It's actual climate change, and they needed to cover it up. And so they blamed oil, gas, and coal that don't emit pulse energy every second, that don't make plumes that covers the planet. I always assume people might not have seen this material, and so this is a radiation fallout map. Here's another one from Japan. Gives you an idea what I'm talking about, how it covers the planet in radiation, invisible snowstorm of energy, invisible heat storm. Now, if you took all these isotopes and put them together in one place, you're talking about incredible heat energy. Nuclear plants masquerading as climate-friendly shouldn't qualify for green financing. Right, nuclear plants are masquerading as green. And he started that particularly in 2015. There was a big push that is sustained and has been now is out of control, where they're screeching that nuclear is the only solution to save us from nuclear. Bruce, nuclear power, which is Canada, recent issuances of $500 million in green bonds. So nuclear, the Canadian, there's no regulatory agency to rein them in. They're all captured. And so now they're just spending $500 million here and there on what they're calling green bonds. So in Canada, they have designated nuclear as green. Therefore, it can buy green bonds, which gives it a huge tax incentive to do stuff like this, the money they can save. But nuclear is not green. It could never be green. It has no attributes whatsoever that are green. Everything is the most carbon-intensive creature in human history, and it kills all the species. Nothing on the planet has an immune system to it. Helped extend the life of Ontario's biggest nuclear power plant, is being touted as a critical step towards decarbonisation. In the last 24 months, 633 nuclear power plants worth of renewables came online. So how long would it take you to build 633 nuclear power plants? 50 years, 100 years? And the technology now is getting so absurdly cheap and so incredibly efficient and effective that by 2026, the International Energy Agency estimated around 4,800 gigawatts will come online in just the next 4 years. That's equal to 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewables. And that's equal to all current fossil and nuclear power on the entire planet. And so it's just going to keep doubling every 18 months, steamrolling. So what you see nuclear doing now is the dead man, the drowning man's panic, where they latch onto everything and drown everything as they're going down, right? That's what the nuclear industry, it's in panic mode, it knows it's dying, and it has captured key positions in governments, it captured the universities and captured your medias in increments over decades. And it's well positioned to hang on and drown everything, the entire planet, as it also becomes eventually extinct, but their radiation lives on for billions of years. poisoning all the species. It could be seen as a dangerous and time-wasting dead end. A corruption of the very notion of green financing is exactly what Bruce Power buying green bond. It's outrageous. It do show you there is no functional regulatory or government on the planet, certainly in Canada. According to Hackett, head of sustainable finance at BMO Capital Markets, co-lead green structuring agent for Bruce Power, claimed that nuclear is necessary to the net zero transition, and they're quoting the Globe and Mail, who pumps uranium stocks 3 to 4 times a week, every week since Fukushima, sucking people into buying worthless stocks in the uranium industry. All of them should be arrested and jailed forever. According to Hackett, the urgent need to green the energy and power sector means nuclear power is a worthy recipient of the green finance. And green finance now is a charade that you've done. That is no longer has any credibility. And it was created specifically to do that by evilness. It wasn't created to promote. In fact, Ontario, they have a lot of nuclear in Canada. They actually defunded over 700 wind plants, windmills. But confronting the notion nuclear power is green are unresolved concerns about what to do with the reactor's waste products. Again, you never ever hear them talking about why that's an issue. It's because the fuel rods are splitting the atom in the reactor to make power, but after about 16 months or so, they're very brittle. And they only use about 5% of the energy. The problem is they're very brittle. They got billions and billions of microscopic cracks in it where all this radiation is hemorrhaging out. They have to stop using it because it could melt down in the reactor. So they put it in a pool which boils off all day long because it's still producing the atoms in the pools. And it's going to do those splitting the atoms for hundreds of thousands to millions of years. That's an invisible snowstorm coming from 1,000 pools worldwide. The longer the reactors are running, the more the reactor cores are in the fuel pools, the more poison is released from the nuclear power plant site all day, every day. And don't forget that nuclear poison is 1 billion times stronger than industrial poison to all things that split cells. As for the claim that nuclear is essential to avoiding climate meltdown. Independent experts say the world has neither time, funds, nor the expertise to bring the expensive, notoriously slow sector to bear in time to shift the climate crisis in any meaningful way. Which is true, but the problem being is that nuclear is climate change. It's released massive amount into the environment, pulsing energy every second, wrecking all species and the ecosystem and the planet and the biosphere for millions of years, contaminated the entire planet's atmosphere now for 75 years. You take a nuclear weapons testing, and in small modular reactors, there is no small reactor promoter suggesting a prototype could be licensed, built, operating by the end of the decade, says Schneider, the author of the annual World Nuclear Industry Status Report, a webinar hosted by the University of British Columbia in October. That means, if ever, likely not, a commercialization could start only in the second half of 2030. But again, he's not convinced that will actually happen. And it won't. They're just trying to rob the till before the bank takes over, right? Noting that the industry has never kept its promises on schedules or budgets. And we have no time, money, and brain power to waste on the fantasy PowerPoint designs. Early this month, Ontario Power Generation Hitachi announced plans to build a small modular reactor as early as 2028. Even if you manage to bring the project in on time and budget, a practice the industry's never been strong in. The project would just be one expensive generation source in a decarbonizing economy that needs far more electricity and more energy efficiency faster than small modular reactors can deliver. Again, the small modular reactors is their death cry of the nuclear industry. That's the death knell of the industry. The small modular reactors that we're being shown, the cheapest are over $3 billion, which means you're talking about $30 billion to get up to the same power supply as a large one. So obviously, what's going on? They don't know because they've never built one. It's just the death knell of the industry. Betting on nuclear as a climate solution, sticking our heads in the sand. That our government would be this gullible is distressing, especially given the havoc already being wreaked by climate change, which is nuclear. The research, and we've done the research expeditions, shows that Fukushima radioactive fallout has exterminated a large percentage of the species on the planet in just 10 years. All the way from Vancouver to Alaska, the tidal zones are empty. And think about how the world works, right? You got net zero, Miles Allen, he's done a paper and talked about net zero. The United Nations stole it and ran with it. This guy talked about global warming. United Nations stole it and ran with it. BP Oil had a big accident, and then they had a advertisement campaign. And carbon footprint. How do we get your carbon footprint down? I wonder. The idea of a personal carbon footprint was popularized by a large advertising campaign of the fossil fuel company BP in 2005. Look how effective that was. Now everybody, because it's a distraction, right? It's all about distractions. See? James Hansen, a so-called climate change scientist, which was created to promote nuclear, by the way. He is best known for his research in climatology. He's best known for being a scumbag in reality, though. Hansen's testimony was pivotal, turning point in the history of global climate change. And that his testimony started the policies on charging you the official beginning of global warming policy debates, right, which is climate change, global climate change, was James Hansen. BP got carbon footprint. There's the father of global warming and the father of net zero. Under the nuclear sword, every man, woman, and child that lives under a nuclear sword hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accidents or miscalculations or by madness. And the weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us, says President John Kennedy, September 25th, 1961, before the military-industrial complex known as UN. The quote was used by Christopher Hormel in his book Doom Review, Historical and Cultural Context of the Demonic Rocky Flats Nuclear Weapons Plants. The slow death from nuclear radiation happening near any one of the world's 440 nuclear power plants. Because every power plant is hemorrhaging radiation, and they're surrounded by farms. So if you don't live there, they'll get you with the farm food product at the supermarkets. I'm not kidding you either. And all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging absurd amount of radiation. It's an absurd amount. And they're all surrounded by farms. Why are nuclear power plants surrounded by farms, Dana? Well, because there's always hemorrhaging radiation, and all the kiddies will eat the food and get all kinds of illnesses and diseases, and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. Because they love you so much. Here's a new one they're going to bring online, United Kingdom, surrounded by farms, as far as you can see in every direction. So don't be surprised when you're eating Japanese food and it's grown right by the nuclear waste, because that's where they're growing it. It's madness. It's so evil, it just defies that it could exist. It really does. We're going to start jumping into story after story after story here coming up. The quote was used, let me see here. To slow deaths from nuclear radiation happening near any of the world's 440 nuclear power plants. Built in farmlands on top of that. Anything within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant, you are in danger. You are definitely going to get sick. And just think of the tragedies at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. And if you try to think of the whole nuclear picture at once, you become an anti-nuclear activist. All the warheads in the United States arsenal includes 35,000 cone-shaped miniature nuclear warheads. I couldn't find a picture of it. I went out and looked for it. The nuclear core for each one is a Nagasaki-sized bomb, 15 kiloton, large city destroyer machines, radiation circling the globe after that. There's no safe dose of radiation. Yet the governments around the world have allowed safety limits to be more relaxed instead of making them more protective. And the nuclear industry has captured the key positions in the government that does that. If they got a country that's not playing ball with nuclear, they'll go in and take over. It's like the economic hitman, where you take money from the World Bank and then you don't pay it back, and now you're in debt, and they wreck your economy that way. Excuse me. China is now controlling the weather. What's the environment cost? And so a lot of people don't appreciate how this actually works. China artificially modified the weather in advance of a political celebration last July, and the government used cloud seeding to control rain and reduce pollution in Beijing. United States has 140 permits for snow resorts to go up in the clouds and seed the clouds to make it snow over the ski resort. If you go look at the stock market, you can actually get weather mitigation stocks for farms. So a big hailstone don't go in and destroy a farm. They can have planes fly through the clouds and shear them off before they get to that stage, right? What they call blue skying. The cloud seeding operation in Beijing was extensive. Takes 2 hours overall. And the study says rockets were carrying silver iodine into the sky to simulate rainfall. And those rockets were landing in people's property on top of that, by the way. Cloud seeding is a common procedure for clearing the skies in China, with the government having spent billions of euros on efforts to manipulate the weather over the last 13 years. Since the 2008 Olympics, right, when they cleared the sky. Remember that one? So seeding would have to be performed continuously, because they were advertising weather modifications as Constipated Party 26 this year, right? The COP26. I've done 13 videos on it, because it started on Halloween, and it ended 13 days later. That's why George Bush calls them the New World Order, I guess. And they quoted James Conkra from Forbes, a truly despicable creature, a truly revolting sack of excrement, James Conkra at Forbes, right? Him and Michael Schellenberg's are demonic. But remember, they chemtrailed Vietnam for 9 years straight, the entire country with an Agent Orange chemical for 9 years. There's 3 million children there with permanent disabilities, disfigurements. They defoliate the entire country, every leaf of every plant, by using chemicals. Of course, those chemicals ran down into their water supplies and their coastlines. There's still endless children being born every day with brutal, incredibly brutal illnesses, abandoned. And now you're very corrupt, and it's a very corrupt country at this state, unfortunately. Vietnam jailed 22 activists for subversion, up to life in jail in 2013. NuScale is the Canadian scumbag nuclear industry. Developer goes public. So they're going to build small modular reactors, but they don't even have any. And they're going to go public shares on the stock markets, which makes them really hard to get rid of them, see? And the profits have to go to the shareholders, so they cut all kinds of corners when they do this. They have no charter to work with. No one can be held accountable, so there's no incentive not to be evil. Well, nuclear power is bad for your wallet and the climate. It heats up the planet, and it's always a decade late in being completed and double to triple the expenses, yeah? French Environment Minister asked their government, which is EDF, to audit nuclear availability. In other words, they shut down a lot of reactors. They got over 1/3 of their fleet is shut down, and just shut down 4 more. 2 because of flaws in the welding or in their containment system. They had to shut down the second one because they found a flaw in the first one. Iran nuclear talks adjourned, seem resuming before the year's end. Now, Iran is surrounded by 49 USA military bases. And each one of those military bases, biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons. And they're carrying out electronic warfare in the country. They have land, sea, air embargoes, and they're begging for a war. Nuclear power is clean and reliable, yet unpopular, and should America reconsider atomic energy? Nuclear power is not clean, is not reliable. All the reactors, majority of reactors on the planet are very old reactors. France has 1/3 of theirs shut down because they're old and unreliable. Should America reconsider atomic energy? The nuclear renaissance ended in the United States at 3 Mile Island. Flat dead. They had 100 reactors plans on the shelf, or in the process of getting started, or even started, and they ended all of them when 3 Mile Island happened. And they done that because in 1959, Santa Susana melted down a sodium reactor, and it's 460 times worse than 3 Mile Island, which, by the way, poisoned over 2 million people right away, who knows how many total, and they covered it up. And so Arnie Gunnarsson and Lake Barrett, a couple of years after, for 2 years evaporated all the radioactive water. It took them about 2 years to do that. When people stopped looking, they started boiling off and releasing into the environment insidious amount of radiation. The radiation never stopped for several years coming out of there. It's disgusting. It's a disgusting, hateful, vicious, and bizarre industry and everybody in it. EU faces nuclear rift and decision on energy funds and futures because the EU is under a lot of pressure to call nuclear green. And then they would get all kinds of investors because of the new way they're distributing money. Is not supposed to be for carbon-intensive stuff. And nuclear is the most carbon-intensive. And because they only need a couple of people that are appointed, not elected, and that have no way of being, or no fears of accountabilities, are just being paid off, unfortunately, is a good possibility. And they vote yes, and then the countries, the European Union countries, are in real danger forever. But there's something strange about this story is that the EU had postponed the definition twice already in the last, say, 7-8 months. So over a long period of time, both times when it came time for them to make a decision whether nuclear was green or not, both times they deferred it. So there are pains of conscience going on. But they need everybody to vote yes, and they'll get the job done. The nuclear industry will send 7,000 lobbyists after 3 people, if that's what it takes. See? As coal plant closes, Wyoming wants nuclear. No, that's the nuclear industry. South Bruce residents push back against the nuclear waste referendum. This is Canada. And they want to put nuclear waste in farmland, and they want the farmers to continue farming the whole time. Everything gets repackaged and everything is vented. It's the very definition of evil, what they're talking about doing. And I mean evil on a whole different scale. They purposely want to put it in a farming community, and everything is vented into the community, into the farms. Anti-5G necklaces are radioactive and dangerous, Dutch nuclear expert says. Now if that is true, I have no doubt the nuclear industry allowed it to happen to get rid of nuclear waste. Zero doubts. Because you got to realize the nuclear industry used to have radioactive suppositories. They used to put out radioactive makeup for children, targeting children with highly radioactive makeup that disfigured the children. Like if you actually look at how often the nuclear industry targets and to harm children, it's frightening. Owners of quantum pendants and other negative ion jewelry have been advised to store them away. It has been found to be continuously emitting ionizing radiation. And I haven't been able to figure out exactly what's going on, unfortunately. But if that's the case, then whoever produced them should be charged. And the only reason they're not being is because there's a connection back to the nuclear industry, no doubt. And when you bring in the World Health Organization, these are incredible, disgusting parasites. They are the snake in the grass, yeah? And they even got a snake on their symbol, for goodness sakes. The World Health Organization is a specialized agency of United Nations that killed, when they got created, they were a military-industrial complex. They caused 3 million dead in North Korea. Imagine how many people they maimed. They burnt down every community in North Korea. And they spent 60 years getting you to demonize them so North Korea doesn't tell what happened to them by United Nations. And so the World Health Organization, all nuclear power plants, when you look into the distance, you see nothing but farms everywhere. Canadian nuclear leaders collaborate on nuclear decommissioning. Like, they have no successful decommissioning. Their decommissionings in Canada is they bury it in cement or grout. Pickering nuclear power generation site, surrounded by farms. That's the definition of evil, by the way. In Ukraine, Putin tries his hands at nuclear blackmail. Here are 7 ways to stop him. So this is the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Do you know who they are? They're the nuclear industry, for goodness sakes. They're key energy people in the government. If you ever go to their site, I don't recommend doing it unless you have a browser set to accept no cookies. These are scumbags. This site was created by scumbags after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it hasn't stopped since. Psychedelics, the newest tool in nuclear negotiation. Really? Really, guys? The plan was simple. Give the psychedelic drugs, like ecstasy, the Soviet scientists and military personnel set to negotiate with Ronald Reagan in 1985, thereby injecting empathy, and cross-cultural understanding into the nuclear peace process. Imagine all the jerks falling, getting hypnotized. Official break ground for Ontario provincial government nuclear materials sorting facility. Nuclear material sorting facilities. Right, so what they're going to try to do is claim, well, that can go to the dump. And then this goes to the nuclear repository that doesn't exist. It's a 100% scam is what they're up to. If this was true, they would have done it a long time ago, right? They're just burying the bodies is all they're doing. Defueling a Pilgrim completed in record time. Well, that's reassuring, isn't it? How Jimmy Carter stopped the first nuclear meltdown long before he was president. These types of story about Jimmy Carter. Now, he was at Chalk River here in Canada, was considered the world's first. There's been others, trust me. But that's the one now that it's like calling 3 Mile Island the world's worst nuclear accident when it was actually Santa Susana 460 times worse. 3 Mile Island was brutal, don't get me wrong. Stopped the first nuclear meltdown. So this is another fantasy story. A recent tweet had drawn attention to a little known area. Somebody done a whole story on it because of a little tweet. Of nuclear history, the time Jimmy Carter stopped the first nuclear meltdown long before he was president. In Chalk River Laboratories, Ontario, went through a partial meltdown. 1952, they're still trying to clean it up. Over 70 years later. Over 1,000 people went in with Jimmy Carter, by the way, allegedly. The lab had failed to provide adequate cooling, and they weren't jailed. They were given jobs to do it again, by the way, for several experimental fuel rods, resulting in them rupturing and melting, sending 10,000 curries of fission product. There are cases, I'll tell you that. 10,000 curries of fission products and about 1 million gallons of cooling water. That's the little weasel when he was young. Carter was called to lead the cleanup because of his experience building the nuclear propulsion system, which is not true. He happened to be there. He wasn't called in as the expert. They only had seconds that I could be in the reactor myself, he claimed. Only had seconds. So they allegedly built a model of the reactor on a tennis court and practiced there and then ran into the reactor building, is what they're claiming, right? And finally, when we went down to the reactor itself, which was extremely radioactive, we would dash in there as quickly as we could, take off as many bolts as we could, the same bolts we had just practiced on in the tennis court. Each time our men managed to remove a bolt or fitting from the core, the equivalent piece was removed from the mock-up in the tennis court. Worked in 90-second shifts. Now, as you start cracking all the nuts on a reactor core, gamma shines, X-rays, and neutron bursts are coming out. It was a multiple meltdown. Listen, they didn't solve it. This is fantasy that they solved it. He said for 6 months he had radioactivity in his urine. And they let us get probably 1,000 times more radiation than they would now. I don't know, let's call up some of the homeless that have died at Fukushima and ask them. Working urgently in short shifts, the team were able to clean up the mess of the first partial meltdown in history. 10,000 curries of fission products. And so Jimmy Carter's exposure to nuclear danger, another story, 2011, claimed he was physically lowered into a damaged nuclear reactor in Chalk River, Canada, and exposed to levels of radiation unimaginable today after an accident. Lowered down into a nuclear meltdown on a piece of rope. Oh, yeah. 1952, Chalk River was the site of 2 nuclear accidents in the 50s. Significant damage to the core. The control rods could not be lowered to the core because of the mechanical problems and human errors. These rods did not reach the destination, were taken out again by accident. The fuel rods were overheated, resulting in a meltdown. The reactor and the reactor buildings were seriously damaged by hydrogen explosions. That's with an S. Multiple hydrogen explosions, which meant you blew apart the reactor. Because that's how that actually works. The seal of the reactor vessel was blown up 4 feet. And they weighed like 24,000 pounds. 4,500 tons of radioactive water were found in the cellar. The water was dumped in ditches 1,600 meters from the border of the Ottawa River, because that all goes to Ottawa drinking water supply. During the accident, 10,000 curries, or 370 terabecquerels, radioactive material was released. 10,000 curries. So a Beck was a Becquerel, one atomic disintegration per second. A curry is 37 billion becquerels. 37 billion becquerels. Count backward from 37 billion for me. So cesium, a gram of cesium would have 88 curries, and a gram of strontium per gram would have 140 curries at 37 billion curries per gram. So 10,000 curries, and a curry is 37 billion atomic disintegrations per second forever, over and over and over. So when you equate potassium 40 is 0.000071 curries per gram, where cesium's 88 curries per gram. And by the way, potassium, you can eat that every day your whole life, but you can't bioaccumulate anymore. Neither can anything else, because your body regulates it, like the thermostat regulates the temperature in your house. So that works out to 113 grams, which is 3.9 ounces escaped from the nuclear meltdown, is what they're claiming. So 10,000 curries if we're just not talking about uranium or plutonium or any other things, if we're just going to talk about, call it cesium only, which is absurd, by the way. The reactors are made of uranium, plutonium, not cesium. And the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods is going to be curium, not cesium. Curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. But 3.9 ounces. It's a piece so small, I can hide it in the palm of my hand. I can hide it right here like this. You wouldn't know it was there. And so they're saying that's what they contaminated the place, and they had to lower them down into the reactor by rope. And all of these people, you just want to take them. Never mind. Well, it's not very polite anyway. Let's put it that way. They had a second accident involving a fuel rupture and fire. Some fuel rods overheated. Well, when a fuel rod overheats, the zirconium cladding melts or catches fire, is how that would happen. And that's a meltdown, multiple meltdowns. Using a robotic crane, one of the rods with metallic uranium was pulled out of the reactor vessel. The arm of the crane moved away from the vessel. The uranium caught fire and the rod broke. Uranium caught fire. Zirconium cladding caught fire, and that burnt the rod. It's like you wrap a newspaper around kindling for a fire. The largest part of the rod fell down to the containment vessel, still burning, and the whole building was contaminated. So when you start really looking at it, the valves of the ventilation system were open and a large area outside the building was contaminated. The fire was, I love this part. The fire was extinguished by scientists and maintenance men in protective clothing. You got to wear a 4-foot lead shield, thick lead shield. So what they done was, allegedly with buckets of wet sand, was they ran past the crack in the reactor vessel and threw their buckets of sand in it as they were running past it. That's how they put out the fire. Throwing the sand down the moment they passed the smoking entrance. This sounds like whoever wrote this was very, very, very high on drugs. Biden nominates a Texas A&M engineer for nuclear security. And you can just tell by looking at his face, this is some weirdo, a scary weirdo. A reactor at St. Lucy's nuclear power plant was down over a day after a manual reactor tripped. So somebody manually shut down the reactor there. By the way, FPL doesn't prevent endangered sea turtles from being sucked into a nuclear power plant pipes. Indian pike kills around 17 billion fish a year, plus turtles. 17 billion large fish each year. On the brink of a new era in nuclear fusion. No, we don't need nuclear fusion. Renewable energy was 633 nuclear power plants where the renewables came online in the last 24 months. Fusion's a fantasy. If you took all of these really clever people and put them to work on renewables, we would have solved it. It's not too late. If we took all the astrophysicists and everybody else who burning endless resources and precious metals and they're looking into space, because it won't matter what you learn because you're killing the planet with nuclear. You got to come up with solutions for nuclear immediately. We have to start at some point. North America Nuclear Waste Management System. Management, not repository, but management. Where to keep it on the surface and vent it into the atmosphere in your communities. Netherlands plan for 2025 support nuclear new build. But by 2025, right? Because by 2026, we're going to have another 5,500 nuclear power plants where the renewables online. In just another 2 or 3 years, nobody is going to be able to ignore that kind of progress. Everybody is going to, in the future, I guarantee one thing. There'll be lineups at the graveyard of people who want to go in and piss on the graves of people from the nuclear industry. And that will continue till the very end of time. EU faces nuclear rift in a decision on energy funds and future. Nuclear rift. There's a lot of pressure on the people at the EU to say, yeah, nuclear green, yeah. And that, got a rat at the very top up there. What the hell, man? Big rise in energy prices on purpose has ignited a debate about whether the EU should promote nuclear power. So, no matter what happens, they're like, a plane fell out of the sky, maybe we need nuclear power, George. Or there was a traffic jam. Yeah, we got a big traffic jam here in downtown Timbuktu. I think we need a nuclear power plant to solve that. Or if your favorite hockey team or baseball team or football team doesn't win, you'll be like, we need nuclear power plants. That'll fix that. This is what their greenwashing remains a controversial issue, which is what we're worried sick about, that the EU is going to conflate nuclear with evil, dirty nuclear. You have to be able to look sufficiently ahead. And really, you better start looking at what I got here. I'll tell you how to look ahead. Look ahead at this. That's nuclear. Covers the whole planet immediately within within 20 days, the 31st of March. So imagine if that model ran for another 2 weeks, then all that's covered. It never stopped coming out. It's a continuous plume. Imagine if that was a snowstorm covering the planet at the one time, sustained. You bloody well get it then. That's global warming for you, Dana. Shut up. A study was commissioned. Again, I can show you fake study after fake study after fake study that they created to promote their particular causes. Deep isolation says deep borehole disposal, a cost-effective option. And so what they're going to do is drill a big hole in the ground, dump the nuclear waste down there, and fill it in. And by the way, they're the people that created it. And at some point, that will melt down sooner than later, by the way. They're not trying to come up with a solution. They want to drill, and they won't drill 1,000 miles away from everybody. They want to be in a community surrounded by farms. That's the criteria. The first criteria is it's going to be surrounded by farms that are active. And the second criteria is it has to be in the community. And so the community is like, get lost, which is exactly what they want. They don't want a solution. Because they can't have a repository because of the nature of this fuel. That once you introduce air down to it, it detonates. And then you have a cave-in, right? Most people, they'll show the media, will show it. It'll look like a cave-in where they buried nuclear waste. We see many depictions of it in Hanford. 585-mile nuclear wasteland, and they want another $700 billion. It'll never stop there, by the way. Weeks left to rescue the Iran nuclear deal. To stop them from getting a nuclear weapon, so it's harder for them to threaten them. See, right now, there's 49 military bases on their borders, and it's a big industry. Try keeping 49 military bases funded and all the equipment and manpower, etc., 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 right? And security, all the airplanes and helicopters and weapons. And it's an industry. Somebody has to produce all these weapons to fill all the bases. Chinese army conducts nuclear, chemical, biological warfare drills in Tibet. Finland nuclear power plant to power up 12 years late. This is madness, right? Egypt and the UKAEA discuss cooperation in nuclear security. Nuclear weapons are a crime against humanity. Hundreds of scientists call on America to reduce the nuclear threat. Nearly 700 scientists, engineers, including Nobel laureates, call on the administration to take a number of steps to lower the risk of nuclear war, including slashing the United States' arsenal of nuclear weapons. Standard Uranium sees nuclear energy as a key player in carbon-free future. Carbon-free future.
Would it be accurate to say that no one has died as a result of exposure to radiation in Fukushima? And secondly, can you assure that no one will die as a result of exposure to radiation in the future?
You want to take that one, yours. Well, what we know right now, there have been no fatalities that we're aware of that are directly related to radiation exposure. I believe there were a few workers who were killed at the plant because they were performing work, and when the tsunami hit, they lost their life. There are some workers.
Would it be accurate to say that no one has died as a result of exposure to radiation in Fukushima? And secondly, can you assure that no one will die as a
extreme increase in mortality caused by cardiac diseases. Over 12,695 people have died in a single month in a single community. I don't know about you, but that's called a increase in mortality. Ooh. And they're only talking about heart attacks in that particular number. Ownership change involving parent company for Gina nuclear power plant. Oh man, I can't remember where that's to again. The U.S. still sees no pathway back to Iran nuclear deal. So, most wars are started by the country that wants to go to war. So they attack themselves, and then they blame it on the country they want to attack. So they attack their own country, then blame it on the country they like to attack. And so this is how think tanks. Here's Patrick Clausen.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war.
So if Iran doesn't compromise, it would be best if somebody else starts the war. So he starts off with, it's very difficult to see how this president is going to get us to war with Iran. The significance of what he said there is absurd. It's frightening. India has long suppressed anti-nuclear activism. In 2019 it came out that the year after Fukushima, they were going to build a new nuclear power plant in India. India arrested 9,000 people, protesters, they were charged with sedition. Their crime was participating in a peaceful protest against establishing a nuclear power plant in their area. They arrested 9,000 of them. They beat them up, arrested 9,000 of them. And even today, these people's lives are destroyed. They can't travel. They have to show up to police stations to check in all the time. They're targeted. Their children are targeted. That's the typical nuclear industry's routine. And if that's not disgusting, what is? U.S. again calls for arms control talks with China. Well, shouldn't China call for arms control talks with U.S.? Because U.S. is insane how much weapons they got. And they both buy their weapons from the same supplier anyway, so. Adrian Kelby, the CBE, appointed as chair of Nuclear Waste Service. Oh, bless her heart. She was chair of the Nuclear Waste Service, eh? They're responsible for the management, this is United Kingdom, decommissioning cleanup of 17 nuclear sites across United Kingdom, because they've never cleaned up a nuclear in the country before. Now, just because they got that job, that don't mean they're good people, okay? Case in point, nuclear power plant manager was arrested for downloading indecent images of children at work. Dutch coalition invests a lousy €500 million in nuclear. Is that some kind of sick joke or something? They can't even buy toilets for €500 million. NCP criticized the center's in principle nod. I think this is in India. Yeah, I think this is India. Got a sneeze hang on. For another nuclear site to get the nod for it, right? So the victims are out protesting. Germany plans to phase out nuclear energy as Britain expands it. Taiwan had just held a referendum on nuclear power to start up a nuclear power plant that's been sitting idle, and the people voted against it. One of the rare good stories we'll hear this year. The United Kingdom's future nuclear deterrent. They want to replace all the subs, all the nuclear weapons. And of course, United Kingdom is such an impoverished country because the people that work for the industry and the government are emotionless scum. They're the worst thing ever happened to the United Kingdom. They're the inbreeds of the inbreeds of generational inbreeds. Designed and constructed in the United Kingdom, new submarines replacement warheads will include some of the most advanced systems ever built that they can't use. You can't launch a nuclear weapon at somebody else. They're going to fire back at you. Literally the stupidest thing imaginable. Employing world-leading cutting-edge technology to deliver an effective and intensely formidable capabilities. Formidable? Yeah. Which is still not as formidable as a biological weapon. Directly supporting tens of thousands of jobs across the country. You really think that whatever else you spend that kind of money on, you're talking like $1 trillion, is not going to create tens of thousands of jobs? As jobs for weapons that you can't use. That's not jobs. That's destroying all your precious resources in your country. Can you survive a nuclear attack? With Iran and North Korea, of course, United Nations burnt down every community in North Korea, killed 3 million civilians, injured, wounded, probably 10 million, still under siege today. Dutch nuclear operator readies for new built plants, but by the time they get to it, renewables will be just dominant. So my prediction now is in the next 4 years, you're going to see a revolution, an absolute revolution in renewables, because the price is just free falling, and its capabilities are just going through the roof. And so there is hope. The nuclear family. So if you have husband, wife, and a daughter, husband, wife, and a child, I should say, that's considered the nuclear family. This is the nuclear industry, right? Trying to mold every facet of society and then use these connotations in order to try to achieve that. First off, Nuclear Engineering International are incredible, degenerate cowards. They never put their name on the story because they're a lobbying group for the nuclear industry, hiding as a media. So Aviva signed strategic deal with the EDF, which is France, which is who Aviva is, right? You get 2 sections of the government has a deal. Really? Wow. That's only coming up because of all the controversies with nuclear down there. Kim Jong-un, they're trying to build stability. They're trying to bring stability back in because of the stock market, right? Once it gets scarce, it's fight or flight. Kim Jong-un, baby-faced dictator to nuclear hard man. Again, right, you see this constant, it's like they get paid money if they criticize North Korea. Like, well, what is North Korea? There's so many nuclear weapons pointed at North Korea from so many countries that, you know, United Nations burnt down every community with napalm, the worst thing you could possibly do. Every community. 3 million dead, 10 million wounded civilians. And then they had land, sea, and air embargoes for 60 years. And you don't think that's going to turn into hell? What do you think the countries... You think the country is just going to go around... That's the industry. It's insane. Oyster Creek among potential sites for small nuclear reactors. Oyster Creek among potential sites for reactors that don't exist. Might never exist. But you see these headlines coming out constantly, yeah? A subsidiary of South Korea automaker Hyundai and the nuclear company Holtec International, we know Holtec, they're just scum, have partnered to build a nuclear plant prototype that could be based in Lacey, might not be sometime in the future. Anything to keep the investors on the edge of their seats, see? Iran nuclear talks not going well. Don't worry, Patrick Clausen said it earlier. Very hard to see how this president can get us to war with Iran, so it'd be best if somebody else starts the war. Farley nuclear plant employees provide Christmas to the Uri families again this year. course, there's endless orphanages in Chernobyl that they won't donate a single television set to, where the children have nothing. BPCL announces new nuclear hydrogen deal with, is this India again? Atomic Research Center, yeah, in India. The third largest refinery in India. So India is doing an awful lot of posturing about nuclear lately, I noticed. Fear the corridor deals. Nuclear energy is cheap and climate friendly, says Creep. I'm not sure who that is. Hungary? Called a rally against extending the lifespan of aging South African nuclear power station. Right, there's been a lot of pushback about South Africa. South Africa, it's a very old plant. It was a poorly built plant. It was also built close to large communities. And it's on a fault line. Safe and secure transport of radioactive material. Well, first off, this is International Atomic Energy Agency site. There is no such thing as an International Atomic Energy Agency. Yeah, I mean, they got that name. They're a company, a corporation. But they don't actually fulfill their duties. They need to be disbanded, preferably jailed, certainly replaced. They're not a functional organization. They're a death cult, a secret society. Only weeks left for U.S.-Iran nuclear deal. So, right, there's this endless doomsday presence, right? Only weeks left. Yeah, what if not? Well, we're going to have to bomb them, Dana. With nuclear, Dana. Iran, no UN camera access at the nuclear site until sanctions are lifted, which is the right thing to say. I wouldn't give them anything. Ignore them. They only exist because you're paying attention. Ignore them. Go on with your life. Gas, nuclear, green status debate, a tiny issue. Gas, nuclear, and green status debate, a tiny issue. Nuclear is not a tiny issue. Nuclear is an extinction level event. That's what Fukushima has done to our planet. Nuclear Waste Management Organization. They're Canada's nuclear waste producers have now created a nuclear waste management organization whose solution is the cheapest solution imaginable, is to dig a hole and dump it in the hole and run away counting the money they didn't spend. Has reinforced its commitment to only manage Canada's used nuclear fuel, because they were speculating they were going to take other countries' fuel. This is how crazy the industry actually is. Remember, John Kretchen wanted to secretively, was talking about bringing Japan's nuclear waste to Labrador in the Atlantic, Canada. But don't tell the Canadians we're doing it. TVA, scumbags, conduct a survey for residents near Brown Ferry's nuclear plant. And Brown Ferry's nuclear plant is in farming country, by the way. Right on one of their major drinking water rivers. The whole story is nuts. And they use like a salt marsh type system for cooling. The water gets pumped back where they created water reserves, polluted water reserves at that. They're asking residents within 10-mile radius of this disease factory to fill out a survey to determine how individual response during an emergency situation. And so immediately the highways get blocked up and there's no way to get out of the wind is blowing. You can only go one way because you're blocked by a river. It's such a stupid thing to have it in the community. Inside China's, well, if you're within 10 miles of a nuclear power plant, you should sell and get out of there. Preferably sell it to somebody in the nuclear industry. Let them poison their children and friends and families. China's first floating nuclear power station may be able to endure a once in 10,000 year weather catastrophe. Like we're getting storms now at 200, 265 mile per hour gust when they hit shore. The last thing you want is another floating Chernobyl. 30,000 ton floating Chernobyl will be completed next year. Really, China? It's just such scumbags. $30,000 ton is 60 million pounds. Ranjak Singh, French counterparts, parley discussed defense co-production nuclear power submarines. So when it comes to countries hate each other, but if it comes to nuclear technology, that part they can be cronies. Fresh sanctions prevent Tehran from receiving U.S. items to advance the nuclear program. So land, sea, and air embargoes as an incentive to get you to do what they want you to do, not what you want to do. Most people don't know about this crater from a nuclear bomb in South Carolina, where they actually blew up a nuclear weapon to put out oil well. But there was also these planes that lost their bombs. There's around 50 of them that they emit to over the years. Nuclear weapons that are still missing, that were discharged from planes. And into people's communities, into local waterways. Destroyed the playhouse, yeah. Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee regular meeting. A Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. Now, the Americans' legacy of nuclear waste is just hideous. My goodness, is it ever hideous. Like Los Alamos National Laboratory has 900 people on cancer disabilities. They also have 900 or so people that were denied cancer disabilities, and they also have as many waiting. And they all work for the same company that deals with nuclear. Rain and CO2 emissions. Science shorts predict fast and herring nuclear explosions. So CO2 emissions are not what's causing the planet to warm up. It doesn't pulse energy every second. Right? CO2 emissions don't look like this. They don't cover the planet in plumes. Oil, gas, and coal emissions don't cover the planets in plumes. Radiation does. Continuous plume right around the entire planet, lasting for millions of years, pulsing energy every second, aka climate change. Fast reactor facility to go live in 2027 in India will power India's nuclear growth. This is one of the most fearsome, terrifying nuclear power plants on the planet. It's a breeder reactor producing plutonium that is harvested for fuel for other reactors. It's the definition of actual evil. It's the definition of no accountability. This only exists because there's no accountability. The project is currently being executed by the Nuclear Recycle Board. Nuclear recycle are not two words that are supposed to go together. South Korea offers nuclear energy assistance to Nigeria, to an incredibly impoverished country. And so they're taking advantage of them by doing that. Shame on you, South Korea, you crappy piece of nuclear excrement, you. Bring nuclear bombs to a fist fight. Nuclear bombs to a fist fight. And so nuclear connotations, you find it now in all facets. It's ingratiated itself in every facet of our lives now. And we find out it's pure evil. Every facet of nuclear is actually evil. EU energy talks dissolve over carbon green finance fights. The fourth nuclear power plant, the time of Taiwan, they voted on Sunday to not restart that plant. It was never started. It was built. It was functional. But because of Fukushima, it wasn't activated. And if they don't decommission it and tear it down, they'll have this fight every year until they do. Only weeks left for U.S.-Iran nuclear deal. So there's a line drawn in the sand is what they're trying to portray. But this is like the fifth time this year we've seen that connotation. So it's simply not true. Time to get serious about Asian nuclear weapons free zone. Time to get serious. It's obviously written by the Pentagon or the military industrial complex. Only weeks left for U.S.-Iran nuclear deal. We hear that over and over, man. So heavy propaganda each day on that story. Commercial opportunity for Australia to consider nuclear to get to net zero. I showed you the father of net zero earlier, right? And the father of global warming, and the father of carbon footprint, and the father of climate change. Commercial opportunity. So Australia has a very, very, very tiny section of people that are in very influential positions and from the nuclear industry, and they have captured a lot of the regulatory and key positions in government, media, and institutions in Australia. And they're constantly, and this is, they're also funded by the Mineral Council of Australia. And it's illegal for Australia to have nuclear power. And these people are actively pursuing sedition against the country by trying to overturn that by using propaganda. That's how the nuclear industry works. There's a certain section of people that get in the nuclear industry. They're extremely vicious and hateful people. And they'll do anything for their paycheck as long as it's evil. It has to be evil. And so they gravitate towards nuclear because you realize there is no accountability. Biden should institute Russian sanctions this minute. This is Jay Ambrose. So Russia was used for many decades as the boogeyman. The boogeyman Russia uses America as the boogeyman. And then they both use China, or China uses both as the boogeyman. And that's meant to keep the population in a panic mode all the time. A constant state of panic for a certain percentage of the population that then will bring that worry to other percentages of their friends and families. Russia proposes Russia and the U.S. do not deploy nuclear weapons outside their territories and return nuclear weapons already outside their territories. So here's Russia proposing that they reduce the threat by getting the weapons back into each countries. But there's a strategic there. Their nuclear submarines are still out there masquerading in the ocean as jellyfish. Nuclear Medicine Center to boost cancer genocide program in North Lutsen. So nuclear medicine is a genocide machine. We've covered this many times with academic studies. EU faces nuclear rift and decision on energy funds. So can nuclear exist without being constantly insidiously evil? We have a resounding 95% of the people say no, nuclear industry cannot exist without being hideously, monstrously, insidiously evil. Nuclear is by definition evil. And we thank everybody for participating. Remotely operated vehicle will revolutionize nuclear decommissioning industry. We've heard this before, of course. You're going to have to make the remote control vehicles with 4-foot thick walls. It's a fantasy. And that's why they use bio-robots, aka homeless. Discusses cooperation nuclear energy with the French counterpart. We kind of touched on that earlier. There is no cooperation. There's a cooperation for the cover-up, cooperation for venting it into the communities. South Bruce Council votes shut down pro-referendum petitioners before hearing them. So that's a shocking story here in Canada. South Bruce is the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, the same people that created it in the first place, by the way. So Protect Our Waterways was shocked to learn during December 14th, the South Bruce Council meeting here in Canada, the mayor and the councillors not only debate a motion about holding a referendum on hosting the Nuclear Waste Management Organization's deep geological repository, the big hole in the ground, but also voted unanimously to postpone any community vote on the issue until 2023, well into 2023. So they're going ahead. In other words, they just turned their backs on the communities. They got paid off. And we've seen the Nuclear Waste Management Organization giving those same people in the community tens of millions of dollars to spend it on whatever. Just a friendly gesture. Here's 10 million. Have a nice day. No pressure. No pressure. Right? That's, you know, no pressure.
Well, hello everyone. It's great to be back here at Spurs. So many happy memories for me. Anyway, tell me something. What is this 10-10 thing the club is doing?
Well, it means that we're trying to cut our carbon emissions by 10% this year, and Tottenham Hotspur Football Club was the first to sign up.
We've changed the floodlights at White Hart Lane, so they're low energy. Lots of our fans are coming to matches on buses, trains, bikes and stuff, rather than coming by car.
I see. Whatever, I wouldn't do it. It seems like distraction from football to me.
That's just fine, David. You don't have to join in, just ignore it. No pressure. Right, lads, let's do some penalties.
10-10. Hundreds of thousands of people, schools, businesses, hospitals, movie stars, knitting circles, scout troops, presidents and governments, all tackling climate change in more than 40 countries. Care to join us? No pressure. Was that okay?
I got to play the second part now.
Right, just want to check on that 10-10 thing. Had some brilliant ideas from lots of you how the firm can cut down emissions by 10%. Just quick show of hands, everyone who wants to get involved. Great, that's nearly everybody. And yeah, just for the record, no pressure. Those who aren't quite convinced about it yet. Cool, it's no problem. Your choice. Okay, so those of you planning something here or at home should probably get working on it. Oh, gorgeous. Those of you who aren't... Excellent. Have a great weekend, everyone.
So they're playing those commercials on television. Council was well aware that we were scheduled for first council meeting in January, but chose to vote ahead of our presentations. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Canada. Council had ample opportunity to request to protect our rivers, presents our case as well, but instead chose to listen only to the pro-nuclear. Michelle Stein said it would be wrong to assume that everyone who signed our petition is against hosting the deep geological repositories, but that they were concerned enough about the council's decision-making process to sign it. By ignoring them, the council has only confirmed their worst fears. Our municipalities intend to manufacture consent of its residents rather than listen to them. which is what they do, right? Oh no, we want to hear everybody's voices, and after a couple of years, there's only one voice, it's theirs, and they're going to do whatever they feel like is how they're running this. And right now, they're probably going to get away with it. I mean, they're doing an amazing job. Protect our rivers. Michelle Stein. Protect our waterways, rather. My apologies. Owner of Maryland export business pleads guilty to federal charges attempting to smuggle items out of the U.S. that require an export license. Lab equipment to do with nuclear, apparently. Global demand for coal could hit all-time high in 2022. An ex-Prime Minister, Paul Keating, says Australia's lost its way and claims that Scott Morrison government has given up the sovereignty of Australia to the US. Think about that statement. More money, which everybody's already done to the United Nations, by the way. More money, more problems, delays, higher bills for the Vogtle expansion. They're $12-14 billion over budget. They're a decade behind schedule. And one of the biggest carbon-intensive things on the planet. You got to spend 60 years trying to take it down after it's all nuclear waste. Liver disease drugs now are going big time. Look at that. Because radiation destroys your liver, say by consuming it, eating it, breathing it, drinking it all the time. A lot of it goes in your liver. Death toll in Darfur tribal clash has reached 199. And a lot of these places are rich in uranium, and so the industry will cause conflicts. Which is what we've seen France do to Niger and surrounding African countries that were impoverished. Done the same thing where they created this divide. Rights violations on all sides of Ethiopian conflict. Like when I was a kid, little snot eater, sitting at the kitchen table, Dad would be listening to the radio and they'd be talking about the horrors going on in Ethiopia. That's gallows laugh because it's, let's put it this way. If it was at the dinner table and they were talking about Ethiopia and anybody left to pee on their plate, they didn't do it again the next time. His father would remind you real quick that there's millions of children starving today in Ethiopia. You eat your friggin' food on your plate. I don't give a shit if you like it or not. You eat that. He was just completely distraught about it the whole time. Blackouts could darken Europe this winter. This is fear-mongering. Because France got a couple of nuclear power plants that went off, and then it came out that 1/3 of their power plants are down, and they can't get the maintenance done because of the coronavirus, which is the cover story for Fukushima radioactive fallout, Fukushima food. You eat Fukushima food, you get all kinds of illnesses, respiratory in particular, and then they call it coronavirus. See? It's just that coronavirus is 100% Fukushima radioactive fallout, injuring and killing people. Blackouts could darken Europe. Global chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear security market. So the security for chemical, security for biological, security, right? There's a big industry. Huge, massive industry for security for these facilities that shouldn't even exist. This stuff's not supposed to exist. Like we can all read and write at this stage, we all know better. U.S. should not fly heavy bombers outside their airspace, says Russia. Should not fly heavy bombers. They're talking about nuclear weapons and the bombers. U.S. considers all options to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, says the State Department. So, by the way, all of these headlines tonight are from Saturday's 24-hour cycle. All of what I'm showing you is just one day cycle of news. And generally, I won't cover all of this, right? We'll just dive in to whatever we can get through each show. But it's that time of year, we got to just bomb through a bunch of this stuff. World leading experts join UKAEA fusion energy mission, which has been made obsolete by the renewable movement. I mean, 633 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energies in 24 months. If that's not a revolution, what the hell is? If that's not good news, what is? Fusion has the potential to be a critical component in the global effort to tackle climate change. No, it doesn't. Fusion's the opposite of what you want to be doing. Why not come up with something that's simple? Why make something incredibly difficult? They're not being honest. And, they're always 50 years away from achieving it. On top of that, that's the common joke with these guys. A €4 million, 4-year engineering embedded resource framework agreement with 7 companies. Modifications are delivered to chronic radioactive exposures in pygmy wood mouse. They're the prettiest little creature on the planet, aren't they? Squirrels are much more dirtier than mice. Modifications are delivered to chronic radioactive exposures. Well, which you scale up, that's the same thing for humans. Dose rate estimations of freshwater wildlife inhabiting irrigation ponds in the exclusion zones. You know what an irrigation pond is? Yeah, it's for farmland. So if the irrigation ponds are radioactive, what does that mean for the food you're growing there? Right? You don't need me to say it, do you? And look at all the people that worked on the study. The dose rates for bottom-feeding organisms increased from 2013 to 2015 and remain constantly increased after. Fish's cesium concentration predicted to reach a steady state after around 10 years, which is still melting down, for goodness sakes. Radiocesium concentrations in some freshwater fish caught in rivers in the Fukushima prefectures in October 2018 was still higher than the Japanese limits of 100 becquerels a kilogram for general foodstuff. And so they're only talking about gamma. They refuse to acknowledge beta, alpha, neutrons. And so therefore they're degenerate scumbags. Numerical studies of transport pathways of cesium from forests to freshwater fish living in the mountain streams in Fukushima. Radiocesium concentrations in freshwater fish caught in rivers in Fukushima prefecture in October was still higher than acceptable levels. And it bioaccumulates, of course, in increments up the food chain. The effects of low-level ionizing radiation and copper exposure on the incidence of antibiotic resistance and biofilm bacteria. And copper. So if copper exposure, the effects of low-level ionizing radiation and copper. So why would you, if both of them are in the same study, you disregard the copper and you concentrate on the radiation. And the incidence of antibiotic resistance. So just a small low-level ionizing radiation causes an antibiotic resistance in the microscopic world. When you scale it up, that's going to be true then for the animal kingdom, bird kingdom, insect kingdom, mammal kingdom. Differ initially between ponds with and without chronic radiation pollution. It's possible to go anywhere in Japan without chronic radiation pollution, isn't it? There's no such thing as a low-level cesium in that environment. It's going to be loaded up with all the radiation, not just cesium, is what I mean. But it affects the local scale decontamination in a secondary forest contaminated after the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Effects of local scale decontamination in a forest contaminated after it. What that study showed, a forest area contaminated after Fukushima accident was decontaminated. The decontamination decreased the soil plus litter cesium levels by 20%, but not after 4 months. And decontamination did not reduce the plant's 137 cesium concentrations or the air radiation doses. So the air radiation doses stayed the same, and so did the plants. The decrease in spiders was not statistically insignificant. We found no spiders on the research expeditions this year. And at a local scale, decontamination in a forest was not effective. Repeat, it was not effective. Okay, so when you think about that, it didn't change the plants or the air. So when the plants in the air are highly radioactive, decontaminating these plants, they do it by farms, right? So the farms are the decontamination. It gets sucked up into food or it washes down into the river whisks it somewhere else, and the farms suck it up and it's sold to markets worldwide and poisons people. That's your legacy of nuclear. That's the history of nuclear. That's its entire legacy is predicated upon poisoning you and as many children as it can. It's a genocide machine. These are disease factories. These are misery machines. There's no excuse to build a nuclear power plant in farm countries. Zero excuse. And nobody's ever had this conversation before. This is the only site that has ever had that conversation of why are they building nuclear power plants in farmlands for? Well, the easier it is to poison you, Dana. Like I say, this is a new one for United Kingdom. You guessed it. That's the model of it right there, of the future, in farm countries. That's this year's model. So they're not going to give that up, obviously. And then they harvest the food in the nuclear wasteland and they ship it worldwide. You eat it and die. And you can like it and die. They don't care, as long as you die. They just want you to be poisoned. Nothing personal, they just don't like you. Well, that was hardcore, eh? These are hard shows to do. These are the hard shows to do when you got almost 100 headlines to cover. Nobody said it was going to be easy. Well, I'm out of here. Have a great night, everybody. Just kidding you. See everybody tomorrow night. We got all of yesterday's headlines to cover tomorrow night. There's around 86 of them. There is no shortcuts in the truth, right? That's the problem. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hope everybody has a great night. Great day tomorrow. It's miserable down here. Minus 17. It's just miserable. It's so hard to have winter. I hate winter. You can't get as much research in as you want to. All we can do is the best we can do. I'll work hard and do these shows, and if the weather breaks, we'll get out in the woods and look for life, because We're being exterminated as we speak. God bless everybody. See everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night, folks. Take care.